Welcome to the Startup Grind.
I make no sense out of it, but in science, there's a difference between chaos or randomness and disorder, right? Chaos can look random, but actually it's not, because there can be recurring structures, microstructures that recur again and again, and if it's recurring, it ain't random. It's predictable, right? So that was the fundamental. My takeaway from my PhD, having spent thousands of hours looking through a microscope at histology slides and talking to pathologists who said, yes, we see that too, but we don't have time to score it, and it's too subjective, right? So, but computationally, we should be able to measure it, and that's how BrainScanology was born, okay? And were you gonna say something earlier, by the way?
Oh, I was just gonna speak after you guys are already done. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, all right, okay. All right, so my company is BrainScanology, and our main product, or we create a software called Shape Genie, right, which houses this algorithm, which I'll tell you about, in a software that is no code necessary. Essentially, we want to create something that any scientist can use without needing to learn how to code. Okay. All right, and so in this presentation, here's the outline. Right. First, I'll talk about what problems we solve. 2, how we solve it. 3, our main products. 4, usual startup deck info, right? And then 5 and 6, depending if we have time, I'm going to jump into specific examples how our software, right, made new discoveries, right, or solved, revolutionized the diagnostic methods. Okay. All right. To begin with, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Renee. Okay, so she is the best biologist, pathologist, bioengineer, radiologist, you name it. And every time somebody shows up, right, in her clinic, or there's a new disease, a pressing disease in the lab, she has all these imaging modalities at her fingertips. So we have a lot of great imaging modalities nowadays, right? And so she knows how she's going to tackle it, how she's going to describe it. But the problem that she faces is that when she finally analyzes the results, right, she gets either no difference, right, between her, control group and experimental group, or very weak difference, even though she knows that that patient or that mouse, we knocked out an entire gene out of the genome, and yet why is it that our phenotype is no different, right? And so this is the pain point that a lot of clinicians, researchers, and biotech face, right? If you're in that industry, you would know too, right? Something oftentimes, you're comparing something intuitively looks different, or phenotypically, right, or genetically should be very different. Phenotypically looks different, but when you measure a bunch of stuff, it turns out there's not much difference, right? You're scratching your head, right? You know what I'm saying? And one of the reasons is because in biology, right, unlike in the physical sciences, shapes are not perfectly geometric. There is no perfect circle, perfect square in the cell, right? A lot of shapes are amoeboid or blob, right? They're globular. And therefore, a lot of the mathematical approximations of shapes, relative to a perfect square, a perfect diamond, perfect circle, don't work well in biology. It gives you very noisy data, which is also why a lot of machine learning models in medical science overfit. And that's quite common at UC Davis, Stanford, you name it. They sit on a mountain of data. They build a machine learning model that's 90% accurate to detect your favorite disease. They drive 3 miles down to a sister hospital, and the accuracy drops to 60%, and they're wondering what's going on. Part of it is because they have different scanners, right? That's a big difference, right? The model of your scanner, the age of your scanner, stuff like that. But beyond those technical things, it's that when you measure in biology, when we say shape, typically what scientists mean is area, volume, surface area, right? Perimeter, right? And then signal intensity, things like that, right? And then if you want to do, yes, there's other things like curvature and stuff like that. But all those metrics, though they work, they give very messy data in biology. And so that's why a lot of the models are overfitted, because the differences in each of your features are so minimal. So you throw deep learning is great at building models, but it's also great at overfitting on your data, which is why there's a lot of published papers on machine learning models that detect various major diseases, yet very few FDA-approved classifiers, right? Because FDA knows exactly what the problem is with deep learning. It overfits your data, okay? All right, so the pain points that Dr. Renee faces are the same ones that biotech, pharma, radiology, pathology face, right? That is, traditional shape metrics provide very messy data, right? And area and volume, right, what we traditionally measure when we say shape, can't even tell the difference between your left shoe and your right shoe. Think about that, right? When you teach kids to put on shoes, it's very important to know left from right. But if you fill that shoe with sand as a way of measuring volume, it's the same volume in both shoes, right? Something so fundamental in science, we call it chirality, left hand, right hand. it's important at the level of amino acids, only left-handed amino acids become proteins, right? At least in the life forms that we know it, carbon-based life forms on Earth, okay? And yet, something so fundamental as that, area volume can't tell the difference. It doesn't exist, right? And so, right, and that's something that Shape Genie can solve, where we can capture spatial context. We know exactly where gravity is. We know where the middle line of the body is, and that turns out to be very important for creatures that have bilateral symmetry. We have a left lobe and a right lobe, right? And diseases don't always attack both lobes at the same time or equally, okay? And then, and lastly, we give cleaner data, as you will see, and therefore we just give you, better results, right, for all the hard work you put into, to find differences. All right, and so, our shape analysis applies at the microscopic level of cells, right? 3D organs on a chip are a big deal now, okay? And they take on all these weird shapes that are not perfectly geometric. How do you measure, shape matters a lot. There's a phrase in biochemistry, but it's true throughout all of biology, right? That is structure is function. If you find recurring structure, you're gonna find recurring function. And that's how Jennifer Doudna discovered CRISPR, right? I remember interviewing with her in grad school, and she says, we saw this protein, it had this stretch, and she says, looking at the structure, my eye tells me looks like where an RNA molecule would bind, right? And that's how CRISPR was discovered. She says, it's shaped as if, other proteins that hold RNA, that's exactly how the porcupine would look, right? So structure is function, right? That's true throughout all scales of biology. And so our shape analysis software works on cells to, organ images, right? To even hand drawing images, which we'll talk more about, and then, of course, images in the eye, right? Okay. And so this is how it works. So the core algorithm, what we do is say this is the shape of this ventricle in the brain. Say that you're interested in the roof shape, right? You outline it. Shape Genie will then help you extract out, this shape. And what it does is it overlays a grid system, right? That then finds intersections between your shape and the grid lines. And what this does is you can measure distance of every intersection to a reference point, and that turns your shape into just a pair of XY coordinates, position, distance, position, distance. And once your shape is in that form, it can be seen by what's called the Fourier transform, right, which is very common in engineering, right? You can decompose any complex wave, no matter how complicated, like a sound wave or a Richter scale earthquake. It's all just simpler sine and cosine waves added back together, right? And so what you can do is you can decompose that into individual frequencies, okay? And those frequencies are now a multi-dimensional representation of what you began with, right? And it measure things that you just can't see, right? But it's a description of your original shape. And so this is the innovation, right? It's the grid system that turns 2D shapes into pairs of XY coordinates, right? And which allows the Fourier transform to decompose into its frequency domain. And from here, we can analyze the data as is, or we can create what's called scalar values, single numbers that represent, the shape that you began with. If you don't want to deal with, 70 numbers, just derive one number, okay? So in a nutshell, that's the core algorithm of Shape Genie.
Were you able to patent that?
Yes, because what we're able to patent is not the Fourier transform, right? Joseph Fourier is turning in his grave and says, "What, you patented?" Everyone asks that. No, it's the what we patent is the grid system.
It's gridization.
Right, is the grid system, and of course, the Fourier transform. Many other transforms also work with this to decompose this kind of data. So we make sure to include that too, right? We just show the Fourier transform simply because it's a very common one, and we can easily just deploy it, right? But it's the various grid systems, and we optimized it, for, as you will see, for measuring just, biological shapes, right?
Did you get any pushback from the examiner? Because discretizing signals is something that's, a person of ordinary skill would do, like they do it a lot. Did you get any pushback?
Well, it's patents pending, so we will see, right? But according to our patent attorneys, we patented for the applications in medical research. Right, because we want to pay to patent it for everything else. But yes, decomposing a signal is actually very common, right? So that's where the idea came from, actually, right? Like, why don't we, as I see, these squiggly shapes in biology, I'm like, it reminds me of a Richter scale or a sound wave, right? So why don't we just decompose it like a sound wave, and turns out it works, right? Yeah.
Well,
So stay tuned, I guess.
What is the first office action that you will be getting?
You know what? We submitted beyond the provisional, the PCT, beyond that, right? And so I guess how long it takes years for them to whenever they get to us. I mean, so we're waiting to hear back. So, yeah. Okay, and so our main product is this software called Shape Genie, and we have a freemium model so that anybody can create a free account. So for students or anybody want to try it out, it's a legitimately free account. It's just we limit how much storage there is and how many images per month you can analyze. And then of course we sell a premium subscription, which this is actually now just $50. I gotta update that, okay? And then our third product is a custom one where we actually analyze the data for you if you don't want to do it. Essentially, we'll optimize the process and just send you back data, okay? So that's our first product. But then as we're doing this, what we realized, talking to customers, as we're trying to sell this to them, but what we realized that they don't just want access to this software. What they want is us to teach them how to do image analysis so that they can analyze their own data, right? And so we realized we need to create a course on the fundamentals of image analysis to teach people how to use not just our software, but 2 other popular software that works well, pairs well with ours. And that turns out to be our best product, right? And so I was talking to a company that builds AI for lawyers, right? To help lawyers read faster, and they're probably 10, 15 years ahead of us. They said, you know what, the mistake we made early on is that we tried to sell it to practicing lawyers. We got so much pushback because we realized that practicing lawyers, they have habits. They don't want to learn new tools, right? But then somebody told them, why don't you sell it to law students? And it turns out law students were just devouring their software because they're the next generation of lawyers, and they're open to more efficient ways of doing it. So they told us, why don't you sell to students first, instead of, while you're trying to figure out the sales cycle, to sell to, biotech companies, whatnot. And that turned out to be true. So we created this workshop, both the on-demand version and the live one-on-one version. And this turns out to be, the live one-on-one version turns out to be so far our best-selling product for grad students, undergrads, and high school students who all want career skills for the next level. And they believe that Shape Genie is going to be a staple tool in the future of STEM, and I believe that too. And hopefully by the end of today, you will also. Okay. All right, and so that's our second product, also our main product, right? And it comes with a subscription to Shape Genie, right? Okay. And then lastly, so this is third product. So what we did, so during the process of building Shape Genie, my dad was diagnosed with dementia, right? And so like many other families, we wish we had found out sooner. It sort of made a lot of sense in that he kept falling a lot in the months before he was diagnosed. We just thought it was gout because he had gout for many years in his ankle, right? So we thought he's just falling because he trips over himself. But turns out he can't judge depth. So he thinks I'm gonna walk over to the couch and sit down, but he never gets to the couch. He's 3 feet away and all of a sudden he sits, right? And so all of a sudden I realized, I hear the stories on news of elderly people going shopping, getting lost and dying of hypothermia, right? Or cutting themselves while cooking, things like that. It like just made sense, right? So my dad, then once he was diagnosed, it declined really quickly, right? He was trying to take walks at 2 a.m., right? He's trying to, he walks out without a jacket. He thinks it's summer when it's not, right? And so we had to like lock the kitchen door, bolt it, all these things, right? To prevent him from cooking because he loved cooking, right? And so I realized there's gotta be, an early detection method. And so that's when I started looking into it. And I realized, hey, there's this thing called the classic clock draw test. It's been around for 100 years now. It started as a way to detect traumatic brain injury in World War I. But then about 60 years ago, neuropsychiatrists and psychologists realized, hey, this actually is great for detecting dementia, right? And so it has become since then one of the staple tools of detecting dementia. And in its classic form, it's quite simple. You get a pen and paper, and your physician will ask you, draw a clock for me with 12 numbers and 2 hands pointing to 10 minutes past 11. Right? Now, to a cognitively normal person, that's a very simple thing to do, right? But somebody with cognitive impairment, you don't know that your circle actually looks like a triangle, or that your circle never closed itself, right? Instead of 12 numbers, you wrote the number 23 12 times, right? But you don't know that, right? And thus it's cognitive impairment. So this test, though it's so, it tests so many things at once, it's very effective because it tests executive planning, understanding of numbers, understanding of letters, things like that. But the problem why it's not administered at home is because the way you score it is very subjective. As in, unless your clock is obviously abnormal, it's really hard to interpret. Because what if you're just bad at drawing? Or you had a wrist injury due to work, and so you just draw slowly and dragging lines, things like that. And so that's the reason why this test, while so effective, right, is not a screening tool you can do at home by yourself. Which is when I realized that we can turn it into an objective screening tool if we were to measure the placement or the circle, right? The early version, we measured the shape of the circle, right, using Shape Genie. And we were able to define 7 numbers, all of which had normal ranges of what a circle is, and abnormal ranges of what a circle is not. Therefore, all you have to do is draw a clock on a piece of paper according to our rules, and you upload it to the app, and the app will send you a PDF, just like your A1C report. You know, above 7, you're diabetic. Between 6 and 7, you're pre-diabetic, right? And below, 6, you're not diabetic, right? So that was the vision. We want to do that, right? An A1C number for cognitive impairment. And so that's the app, and which may pair well with technologies that do that sort of telehealth holistically. Right? Okay, and so for this one, because of my own lived experience growing up in a poor immigrant family, where even a $20 copay, we had insurance, but a $20 copay was a big deal when you live paycheck to paycheck. So I witnessed many debates between my parents about myself and my sisters. Should we take them to the ER or not, right? Well, there's another bill from the ER, right? And so given that, I made sure that we create a free version of it, right? That you can essentially use for free. And of course, as a for-profit company, we need to create a premium version, and we built this off of the video game apps where, I love playing racing games. All of a sudden I run out of gas, and they say either pay $1 or wait 24 hours, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's okay, well, why don't we do a subscription version of it, right? And build in extra features. And so the free version only detects dementia, okay? And it doesn't store your report. So you have to download to your phone, okay? And it gives no analytics. So you have to, like your blood reports, right? Nobody ever graphs your blood reports over 12 months from you, right? They just hand you that report for that time, right? So that's the free version. And so for the subscription version, which at retail is $10 a year, but we sell it B2B, okay, at a discount. So we included not just the clock drop test, but also a Parkinson's detection test. It's a number writing test where there's a paper with 12 boxes. You just print 1 to 12, right? And we will measure the shape of your handwriting. And with Parkinson's, a classic sign in the writing of Parkinson's patients is that not only your numbers tremor, but all your words bunch, right? So it's a squiggliness and everything bunches together. You just write really small. And we can detect that in very subtly in early stages, right? Because you don't just wake up one morning and all of a sudden you're writing small. It happens over, for most people, years, right? Of course, some people can have it over months, right? So we include that as a secondary, perk. And we offer, of course, offer analytics. So you can just request that, you can store all your reports on your app, okay? And then you can request that we graph all your scores for you so you can see trends, right? So that's CDC Open, okay? So this is our third product, and so we've been selling this B2B right now through faith communities, and if anybody's interested in their companies as an employee perk, we can sell you 500 accounts for like $1 each, something like that, right? And just as an employee perk, okay? So that's what we realized it works better, but right now I'm seeking some interns, business development interns, to call local doctor's offices, because we created for them, right? The typical physician, even though your primary care physician is the first person who usually hears complaint, I think I have memory problems, or I think my mom and dad have memory problems, that person is the least confident in diagnosing that. Because throughout med school, whatnot, residency, they had on average 8 hours of training for dementia detection, right? So they just feel woefully unqualified to do what a psychiatrist does, right? And so that's why we invented this for that particular setting where, right, they can buy batch accounts for each of their patients, and they can have through a master account see each patient's data, right? And if they want, we can sort of create a system to ping them and say, hey, patient Jane Doe, her scores have been in abnormal zone for the past 3 months consistently. Maybe you should follow up. Okay? So that's the vision of this for primary care offices.
Did you have to go through any FDA process for this?
Great question. And so we talked to FDA lawyers and lawyers who work with the FDA and companies as such. And because we are, as long as we don't say that we're diagnosing anything, right? So on our marketing materials, we say that this detects cognitive decline, right? And not dementia. As long as we don't say that, then we don't have to go through the regulatory approval. And the reason, so the FDA created a category called CCAAs, Computerized Cognitive Assessment Aids. And if you want to be in that category, you just have to make sure to say that we're not diagnosing anything. Okay, and the reason, and the thing is that we can't. It'd be inaccurate for us to say so. And it's because multiple diseases or medical conditions unrelated to dementia can cause you to draw weird clocks, right? In fact, UTIs are common in nursing facilities. UTIs cause delirium, right? When you're delirious, yes, you're gonna draw a weird clock, right? But when the infection's gone, your clock reverts to being normal again, right? And so without somebody in there asking you 20 questions, in addition to reading your report, it's really hard for one report to say, oh yeah, you have dementia. When it could be you're dehydrated, right? You took grandma on a boating trip and you forgot to feed her because everyone was having so much fun, all of a sudden she's drawing weird clocks, right? But then when you take her to a psychiatrist asks 20 questions and realize, no, grandma doesn't have dementia, you just forgot to feed her and you didn't give her water, right? And so that's, for reasons like that, right, we don't say we diagnose it, because we can't really, right? Because there's other things that can cause weird clocks, right?
So all those categories, you aren't allowed to detect dementia, detect Parkinson's, you're not allowed to?
We're not allowed to say that in our marketing materials.
So what kind
This
of-
is not a marketing material. Yes.
How do you market your subscription product?
Yeah, we say we detect brain health or cognitive decline. That's what all our, so there's like a gajillion or at least 20 companies out there that have their own apps, right? But there's so many more. And what they all do to avoid being regulated by FDA is to say things like track your brain health, track your memory, improve your memory, test your memory, right? And in, of course, informal situations, they'll say, yeah, this is an effective tool for screening for dementia, right? But in your marketing materials, you can't say that it detects or diagnoses dementia, right? You say cognitive decline, right? Things like that. So brain health, memory health, things like that. So that's the shortcut.
So how are you differentiating your product versus the other ones that are in the market already?
Great question. Yeah, and so that's the, there you go. Okay, our competitors, well, our most classic competitor obviously is the classic pen and paper test, okay? But the problem with that is that it's really hard to score objectively. You can't do it at home by yourself, right? Because if you have dementia or cognitive decline, you wouldn't know, would you? Right? That's the purpose of interpreting your own clock drawing, okay? And then, so our biggest competitor is Linus Health, right? They're like 20 years ahead of us and $50 million ahead of us, right? So they created an iPad version, but what they measure works, except that they measure something different. They measure things like stroke velocity, because they do on an iPad, you can measure, right, how fast you're drawing things, and that does sort of go wrong too, right? But the difference, but our ones, we measure shape, which is more closely aligned to the original intent of the classic clock draw test, right? And so we can measure things that they sort of can't, right? And for them, they created, it's only based on iPads, so we created it with a smartphone for the sake of health equity. One, because of my parents, right? I want to create something my mom and dad could use. But also, we partner with hospitals in Africa, right? Where, they want a machine that they can fit in their pocket, right? Because they drive a van around visiting, 200 patients a week, right? And the van has limited space. They can't just stick an MRI machine there, at least not current MRI machines. There are portable ones coming up, right? And so they said, can you give me something that can fit in my pocket? So my clinical coordinator can just drive around. I said, okay, how about a smartphone? They said, yay, right? So that's the idea. So we created a smartphone version. We do have an iPad version. We haven't released it yet because we want somebody, because smartphones are much more common than iPads, right? Even in developing nations. So we wanted something that will work with just pencil and paper. Right, and we created a free version for sake of health equity, right? And so, I mean, hopefully Linus Clock might buy us in the future, right? Or buy just the clock draw test arm of the company, right? I've been told by people that, you don't have to sell your whole company, right? You can just sell a division of it. But yeah, that's how we differentiate. We're measuring something different. So the analogy I like to say, the difference when you measure stroke velocity versus sort of the end product shape is like, you're measuring whether somebody speak Spanish by whether they can read Spanish or whether they can speak it. That's the difference, right? What we're measuring is your ability to speak Spanish or any language, right? That's foreign to you. As opposed to I can read Spanish, because I can read Spanish. I took 2 years of Spanish in high school, right? But I can't speak it because it's a different skill to put it together, right? So what we're measuring is your ability to speak Spanish as opposed to read Spanish. But they both work for the purpose of detecting cognitive problems. Okay. All right. Okay, so our go-to-market strategy, yes, all our products, our education, shape analysis, and our clock draw test will be relevant to pharma, biotech, universities, and of course, online high schools, they would purchase our education products, okay? And so our current, our target customers are academic labs, simply because that's just my background, and it's where my network is. But eventually, we do want to reach, Novartis and Pfizer, such and such. And I've still yet to collaborate with somebody at Davis. You know what I'm saying? I guess they're just really busy. All right. Okay, and so this is the team, all right, and we have, we're a lean team. We have a full-time engineer, not listed here, but we have a bunch of advisors who get paid. They're part of the SBDC, right? So the government pays them to help us write grants, stuff like that. And we have various advisors who are experts in various fields we need them to be in. Okay, early adopters, okay, these places, okay. And so our exit strategy ultimately get acquired. These are the major stakeholders in the imaging and image analysis field. And I'm happy to say that, so Harris Computer, they've already approached us. They're from Canada. And so they started as computers, that's Harris Computers, but they've been buying up medical systems in Canada. And so they're meeting with us once every 6 months to check up on us. And they say, well, once you hit 1 million ARR, we will allow you. But until then, we're just gonna meet with you, right? So, but I'm happy about that. We're far from 1 million ARR, okay. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears now. So that's all the first 4 points in the outline. Now I'm going to talk about specific examples of what we were able to discover with our software. So here's our website. If you click on the use cases page, here's a table of contents. As you will see, there's videos in each of these categories where we did mini projects just to prove to people in these fields how useful our software is. So I will focus on 2 projects. First is our study of glaucoma. So glaucoma is the second leading cause of blindness in people 50 years and up all around the world, right? And it happens when there's this buildup of pressure in your eye, and that pressure, it causes your eye to stretch, like from front to back. And what that does is it puts pressure and it bends the optic nerve, the nerve from your brain into your eye that communicates between your brain and eye, and that causes blindness, okay? So one of the telltale signs of glaucoma is increased pressure. They measure it with this little thing that touches your eyeball, okay? And then, or it blows a puff of air in your eyeball, okay? And then they also take a picture with a fundus camera. This is the back of your eye. And here you see in yellow is the optic cup, and outside in orange is the optic disc, right? Like a teacup on a disc. And normally your cup should be a lot smaller than your disc, right? But if you have glaucoma, right, your cup becomes very enlarged and almost the size of your disc, and its shape, right? Note there's no longer a circle, but it takes on these weird oval shapes, okay? So those are our 2 telltale signs of that somebody has glaucoma, right? So what we did was we measured the shape of the cup and disc. This is not a cup and disc, this is just the shape of two rings, like a cup and disc. And here we applied the radio grid system to it from the center, and we found intersections between every layer with each radio line. So it allows us to measure the distance of every single dot to the red dot, which is the center. That allows us to turn this shape into this, right, what we call a complex sinusoid wave, right? And when you have data in a complex sinusoid wave, all of a sudden it appears on the radar of the Fourier transform, right? And so the Fourier transform then takes this and decomposes into this, right? And so this is what we call a multi-dimensional representation of what you began with, okay? And though it looks super complicated because the human mind only likes, 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. Anything beyond that, we kind of go, right? And so there are ways to then create scalar values, like single values, right, from this complex data. The most simple one is just add them all together, add all these bars together, and we call that the sum all bins. So you can turn this into one number that represents this, okay? And I'll show you examples of what other indices we created. Okay, and so a very important critical detail, something very special about Shape Genie, is that we can measure something we call pure shape, that is shape apart from size. These 2 objects are the same, because I just drew it in PowerPoint, and I click copy and paste. So it's the exact same shape. I just resized one to be larger, right? So if you measure these 2 shapes as is, we're measuring it at scale, right? We know these 2 shapes are exactly the same shapes, but their size is different, okay? But with pure shape, what we can do is we can resize all objects in a standardized way. In this case, I find the longest internal line, and I resize both while constraining the aspect ratios, width and height, so that a square stays a square, right? It doesn't become a rectangle. When you do that, we can measure what's called pure shape. What we've done is we removed the effect of size, and we're only measuring shape, okay? And this is something unique to Shape Genie, right? And so it's something that this is why we can make discoveries analyzing data that's archived that people have published 40 papers on up to this point, and yet we analyze the same data set and we find something new, right? Because what we're measuring is quite unique, right? We call it pure shape, okay? Shape apart from size. And the cool thing is that when you measure pure shape, it doesn't matter what the magnification is, right? 'Cause a lot of these archived data sets, right? Somebody, takes a picture at 10x, the next person takes it at 5x, and somebody takes it at 1x, right? How close you are to the image, right? And that's problematic for a lot of, machine learning models. You have to do a bunch of, gymnastics to normalize all that. For us, it doesn't matter because pure shape is dimensionless, right? Okay, we just resize things in the standardized form, so we don't even need to know what this original scale is. So we can then analyze archive data much more easily than sort of other technologies. Okay. All right, and another crucial detail is that with all right, so this is the cup and disc, we outlined it, but before we measure it, what we do is we standardize orientation, right? We find the longest length of the inner disc, which is the cup, right? And we make sure that that one, okay, is horizontal before we resize it, and then we just do a vertical rotation, and then we measure the radio grid processing. Why do we do this? Because what we realize is that our technology is so sensitive to orientation, that's why it can detect the direction of gravity. You can define, right, where direction of gravity is. But because nature is inherently polar, by that I mean there's North Pole, South Pole, male, female, anterior, posterior. When we realize that we align the data according to these rules as opposed to fighting against them, we get cleaner data, right? And so we go through this process of orienting everything in a standardized fashion, right? And we get clean data. All right, so when we measure shapes in this radio grid system, the output is 71 numbers. Okay, so every shape is represented by 71 numbers, these 71 bins, right, those little bars. Okay, and so this is multidimensional, right? As an example, the difference between multidimensional and what we call scalar, one-dimensional, is age, right? So 40, right, can be your age. That's a scalar value. It's one number representing your age in years, okay? But your birth date is multidimensional, right? Because there's a month, day, and year. You can calculate your age from the multidimensional data, but you also get so much more information about what season you were born in, what season you were likely conceived in. Was there a famine during that season? Stuff like that, right? And so multidimensional data, though more complicated, provides so much more information than scalar data, okay? So each eye shape, right, these double rings, is represented by 71 numbers, and since it's just a data table, we can just apply data science methods to find patterns. And so what we found, first we analyzed eye images from normal patients from these 4 data sets that are archived, and we found that there's 3 main clusters. And at first we thought, oh, there should be 3 distinct shapes, patterns, but it turns out it's a continuum. So these are all normal patients, okay, defined by the experts who diagnose these people and archive the images. As you can see, the normal can stem from this range where, yes, the cup is a lot smaller than the disc, but it can also have this phenotype here, where it's actually relatively larger and yet still be defined as normal in your vision, okay? And so this is cool because no other technology can do that. And we did this simply just by measuring shape, right? And we showed that it's actually a continuum. And I collaborate with ophthalmologists and optometrists who study this, and they said, yeah, that's unique, right? You know what I'm saying? We didn't know that we can measure it, that it's continuum that can measure this precisely, okay? So what's the big deal of measuring things precisely? Well, then you can correlate, do certain regions of that graph correlate with age, sex, hypertension, diabetes, all these things, right? Because now you can measure precisely. And I will show you evidence in a few minutes that this does correlate, right? We found a new subtype, we believe, at least in one data set so far, of unknown subtype of glaucoma, right? So next we analyzed the glaucoma patients, right? Previously was normal, and we found the same thing, right? There is a continuum, right, of glaucoma shapes, okay? And so of course, we can ask the same questions. Are there subtypes of glaucoma, right, that correlate this kind of shape versus age, sex, all those things, okay? And so this allows us to be more precise in our predictions, and whenever you can describe things more precisely, right, that's how new therapies get created. You know what I'm saying? So previously we thought cancer was one disease. No, it turns out there's a bunch of different diseases. Lung cancer is different than breast cancer. It turns out breast cancer, there's 6 molecular subtypes in the clinic now, but we know through genomics that there's actually at least 10. It's just that no hospital can afford to have all those machines and run all those tests at the same time on everybody, right? And so by measuring things more precisely, we can just make better predictions eventually, right? Okay. So, all right. And so just to prove that what we measure is of interest to machine learning world, we built a machine learning classifier we classify normal versus glaucoma. And so here I just found 3 indices from these, the bar data, right? Sum all bins, bin 1 and bin 2 divided by bin 3. As you can see here, normal versus glaucoma, we just did a Boston whisker plot to show you the differences. And based on this, we're able to build a random forest model that was 76% accurate, which is pretty decent for just 3 indices just from the morphology data, right? We didn't include anything about age or any other clinical features. And then we want to improve this by, we realized there's a change in the ratio, right? As glaucoma gets worse, the wider your cup becomes, okay? And so the ratio between cup length and disc length changes. And here are 2 ratios we were able to derive. And you can see the difference between normal and glaucoma. So when we add these 2, now we have 5 features, the accuracy jumps up to 82%, right? And this, again, just to show, right, how useful shape gene is, right? On the first pass, let's just measure the cup of the shape in the disc. Don't even include things like, sex or age or, pressure in the eye, stuff like that. Just based on morphology, we reach 82% accuracy, okay? All right, okay, now.
Quick question.
Yes.
What was your false negative rate?
The false negative is your specificity, 86%.
So 14%.
Yes, 14%. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And so we analyzed the same thing on this study called the GRAPE study, right? And what's unique about this data set is that they actually gave us the gender of every single patient. So we know who is male, who's female, and we have, in addition to all the other clinical data. And what we found was, yes, again, there's 3 general clusters, right, in the male and female data. But the cool thing is that in females above the age of 40, there's a very specific cluster right here, with cluster 0. See these other clusters, they have a 40+ group, right? But this cluster 0 is distinctly enriched in the 40+, suggesting that there is an unknown subtype of glaucoma in, well, these are Chinese women from China. Chinese women over the age of 40 who have glaucoma, right? And here's just t-tests showing the difference between the various clinical features they gave us, like the thickness of your retinal fiber layer in the back of your eye. We can measure that, right? Pressure in the eye, all these things, okay? And then just as a control, we want to see if this was true in males, not true in males, right? So this phenomenon so far is only to this one data set. So we don't know if we can extrapolate to all women out there, right? But we found it in this data set, and it's not in males, all right? So specific to women.
How big is the data set?
Several hundred.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and then, all right, so I'm gonna switch gears now. So that's our application to glaucoma. Now I'm gonna talk about the clock draw test, right, for detecting early signs of dementia. And so I'm gonna show you, so we analyzed data from this study called the NHAT study. So they tracked 5,000 Medicare patients, right, over 12 years, and once a year they did a full battery of cognitive assessments, including clock draw test. And they scanned the clocks and uploaded them for academic purposes. And so we're gonna analyze them. I'm gonna first showing you what, normal clocks with neat drawers and by careless drawers, and how our app sees that, okay? So this is an example of a neat drawing, right? It's a typical clock, right? Okay? And then when you draw here a series of, this person drew 7 years, right? Each clock is a year, right? Each checkup. And this is all in the range of what is a normal looking clock, okay? And you can see the 7 numbers we give, the 3 most important ones are index 1, 2, and 3. They all stay out of the red zone, which is the, I call it the abnormal zone, but I was told not to say that because abnormal means very something specific in psychiatry. So it's the anomalous zone, the pink zone, okay? All right, and then here's another example of a normal, cognitively normal person, right? Main 3 indices stay out of the red zone. Okay, and here, the second 3 here, index 7, one of them jumps into the abnormal zone because they're getting lazy here. So that this circle is starting to be like a squished peach or an avocado. Okay. All right.
Is that lazy or just being, or is that cognitive decline?
We don't know, but given the fact that the next clock was relatively back to normal, it's probably not cognitive decline.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because and so that's a good question because again, this app is not meant to be a one-time assessment, right? Because dementia, your clock kind of stays abnormal and doesn't, go back to normal. Though, if you get treatment, it can, and we'll talk about that next too. So this is longitudinal data. We'll talk next more. Okay. So these are clocks also by normal people. We know from all the battery of tests that they've taken, right? It's just that they drew these clocks 10 years before the app was invented, right? So their rules were different, right? They were allowed to draw this because a human interpreter can look at this and say, yeah, that's a normal clock. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, it's a circle, okay? And so this is just to show, like, if you're careless in your drawing, you don't follow our rules, your results can be all over the place. See that? So this person is cognitively normal, but because they, you know, drew the edge sloppily with overlaps and stuff like that, right? Their scores go in and out of the abnormal zone, okay, or the anomalous zone. Okay, so just again highlight that you have to follow our rules, otherwise the app's not going to work. Okay, all right, and so this is another case of a careless drawer who's cognitively normal. All right, now let's talk about people who have mild cognitive impairment, as in early stages of cognitive impairment. So one is people who started normal and became impaired, and others is those who started impaired in this study and then got worse over time. Okay, so this is a 12-year study still going on in its 13th year. All right, and so we created, in addition to measuring the shape of the clock, right, we want to create a way to measure the shape of the hands and numbers, but we're doing it subjectively now because it's simpler, okay? So I created this 8-point scale, right? Each question, yes or no, if no is 1 point, right? If you're normal, it's 0. But if you start drawing odd clocks, the number is going to approach 8. Okay, so this is a simple scale that's part of the report. All right, we've yet to automate this part for now. We'll do it in the future. Okay, but for now, it's a human who goes through and checks it and says, okay, yes, no, yes, no. Okay, and so this is they have their own scoring method. This just shows that our scoring method is more precise than theirs. Theirs is more subjective. We're better able to separate normal versus people who have only drawn weird hands, weird numbers, or weird hands and numbers. Right, just to show separation, that we can separate it better than their method can. Okay, so these are people who all started normal. Their scores were 0, right? But through the course of the 12-year study, right, they got worse, right, through the hands and numbers. So that's how we know they have cognitive decline, okay? And so here's an example of the series. They all start normal, right? But each subsequent year, it kind of gets worse. Okay, you see this person here, right? Eventually, the numbers end up outside. There's multiple hands, things like that, okay? And so when we measure this, what we realize is that there are a bunch of people. It turns out, at least in this study, well, we know people in this study, most of the first thing that becomes abnormal is the hands and the numbers, actually, not the edge. Turns out only like 10% of the people we studied so far here start off with odd edges. Okay, but most of the people in this study, the first thing that goes wrong is the hands and number placement, and then some of them do, yes, eventually have odd edges too. Okay, and then. Okay, yeah, so mild cognitive impairment affects the hands and number placements before affecting the clock edge in 90% of people, okay? And then, at least in this study, okay? So now I'm gonna show you clocks for people who started with impairment and got worse, okay? Because dementia, it tends to get worse unless you get treatment and do, you know, behavioral changes. All right, and so we know they got worse through their hands and number scores, okay? And so here's an example, some who started with cognitive impairment and just got precipitously worse, right, each year as part of the study. Okay, and again, they don't recognize that their clocks are odd. To them, it's just a clock. Okay, that they drew it correctly. Okay. All right, and so for these people, yes, still a lot of them, majority of them, probably 60% of them. Okay, their edges never enter the abnormal zone or the anomalous zone, and then some do enter the abnormal zone right through the shape of their clocks. Right. Okay. So all right. So conclusions is that we can definitely, through our drawing rules, we can standardize how the clock draw test is done around the world, right? And that's one of the problems why people don't trust it, because each psychiatrist has their own favorite set of rules, right? Some says draw very carefully, some says, here, copy this clock, right? Because they're there to ask 20 questions, right? So they can extract so much more information than just the drawing process, right? So by creating these rules, right, we have a way that people can track ahead of time objectively track who is at what stage of decline, so that clinical trials for Alzheimer's drugs, which notoriously failed, right, a lot of news recently, is because we realize now that if you catch it too late, then therapies don't work, right? But then the question is, how early is the right time to test somebody? How do you objectively measure that, right? All the other behavioral tests, linguistic tests, right, are very subjective, right? And so something like a clock draw test can really step in and solve that problem, okay? All right, and does this question everybody asks me, does this data that we show here, these patterns, represent everyone else in the world? The answer is we don't know, because every single data set is biased based on its geography and the demographics of who signed up, right? These are people who, yes, they're on Medicare, but they live close enough to a University of Michigan School of Medicine, right, to participate. And of course, if you're participating each year to do a cognitive exam, you're probably asking for help too if you find something wrong, right? And the thing is that, you know, every socioeconomic demographic has certain habits that increase the risk of dementia. Like if, you know, culturally you eat foods that increase your diabetes, you get diabetes earlier in a certain culture, then your risk of dementia is going to be higher, simply because diabetes destroys the blood vessels that leads to dementia, right? So it's not as simple as, yes, this represents everyone else's, you know, progression pattern for cognitive decline, okay? All right.
Yeah, but your software, I mean, so the test is one thing, right? I mean, it's what that last sentence there is really, if you think that the clock test is representative for detecting cognitive decline, but your software just detects shapes.
It
right?
does detect
So-
shapes.
And what this is standardizing that scale, I guess, right?
Yeah, but the difference, the numerical patterns we find might be specific just to the NHATS clock.
Sure.
Like in terms of, you know, only 10% of their patients have odd clocks to begin with, right? Like, you know, for them, the first thing that goes wrong is the number placement and the hand placement. Whether that's true of, you know, people outside the study, we don't know. Probably for most part, yes, but there's always anomalous cases. In fact, the one of the rationales behind, you know, our health equity, or you know, our free version of our app is, you know, so I collaborate with Sid O'Brien in our MRI. So our original company idea was to build a machine learning model based on struck brain MRIs, and then build a classifier on that, right? So we collaborate with Sid O'Brien at University of North Texas, and he's the world's expert on dementia in Hispanics in the US. And he has shown that Hispanics get dementia on average 8 years sooner than non-Hispanic whites. Okay, and everyone's favorite gene, ApoE4, the favorite allele, right? If you have the ApoE4 allele, your risk of dementia is a lot higher. Not true at all in Hispanics in North Texas. Has he studied Hispanics in Los Angeles? No, but he's published many papers on Hispanics in North Texas, and it's very consistent, right? So his whole message to the AI community is that, you know, if you're going to build AI based on ApoE4, everyone's favorite gene, that model is not going to work for 1/3 of the United States population in 30 years. By year 2060, 1/3 of the US will be Hispanic. So that means our favorite gene is going to fail us big time as a medical system for detecting, right, dementia, right? And so thus there's always an exception. That's the nature of biology, right? Is it? Yeah.
So what, you know, and I remember when I first met you, that was your value proposition. You take MRI data and then use your software, and then you could evaluate if the person has dementia or not. So is this a pivot, or what happens at all that?
It is. So that's on the, in fact, we submitted an SBR grant for the NSF for that. It was denied, so I have to modify and resubmit it, okay? But we put that on a back burner because one of our informal advisors, who was a former executive at Siemens, like one of the companies that builds MRI machines, and he had a very doom and gloom perspective. But he said, you know what, like he's working many other companies trying to do the same thing through other technologies, like classify structural MRI. And he says, you know, it's just due to the lengthy FDA approval process and the fact that there's no pill to cure Alzheimer's. He says it's kind of, he thinks it's a faulty business model, but on top of taking a long time to be profitable. So he says, you have a unique software, an algorithm, turn it into a software, sell that as your main product, and that will fund your development of your Alzheimer's model. So that's why we made the pivot, yes. So it's not, we stopped doing that, it's just not our priority at this time.
Okay.
So is the technology that you described here, is that what you guys are, because it sounds like you're monetizing your subscription model for, where were you?
Education.
What's that?
Yeah, for research, but also education, we created an education product, you know, surrounding it, right? Yeah.
So what would you, like, what's the plan for this technology here?
That's a great question, and we're early on enough, right, that we can kind of do both at this point, right? No investors, you know, forcing us to pick, right? Dangling a check says pick one, all right? But so right now, I mean, it depends on what picks up. I mean, our main seller, just based on my background in education, right, was selling these courses because that's my network, right? But right now we're building. We know we've interviewing private doctors' offices and stuff like that, right? And then community groups, faith communities, where that's where people they trust medical information more at their local church than they do their doctors, right? That's the nature of our medical system, unfortunately, right? And so we're reaching out to that. But right now, in terms of being a small team and with limited time, our focus is right now just on what we know works, and that's our education, sort of product. Yeah. But eventually, Linus Health, right, our competitor, may want to buy just CD2 Open from us, right? And so we okay, we'll give you CD2 Open, but Shape Genie, we still keep. Okay, so.
Buy or license?
I guess depends on what they want right now. They would probably want something exclusive, just to themselves. And I think that is, oh my goodness, yes, no, there's a second study. Okay, so yes, more clocks. What is the main point is yes. So turns out when we analyze NHATS data, right? There's 5 categories. Okay, normal drawings, right, and then people who have draw with impaired hands, impaired numbers in hands, and just numbers. But the minority, surprisingly, right, starts with a weird clock edge, right, when they first show up in this study. Okay, and so these are example of normals, right? The full range of normal. Okay, and here the red ones is what we edited out. Because again, otherwise it wouldn't be a fair comparison. The rules that they were told to draw on or draw by are different than our rules. We tell them do not draw overlaps, right? Otherwise, the app thinks you are drawing a weird circle, okay, with a bump on it, okay? But this is in the full range of what is a normal clock, right? So these are clocks that have just hands incorrectly placed, as you can see. This one doesn't even have hands, okay? And then these are clocks with numbers incorrectly placed. Numbers missing, numbers repeated, numbers in the wrong place. Okay, and then these are examples of both hands and numbers being incorrectly placed. But amazingly, what we found is that for our 7 indices, these numbers that we provide, okay, or here are only 6 of them, that the more, that if you have even one type of impairment, right, your scores are more close to the pink zone, the anomalous zone, right, which is pretty amazing, that our technology here is so sensitive, right, that we can actually quantify at a population level, right, that if you're drawing hands wrong, right, hands and numbers wrong, or just numbers wrong, your shape score for your circle is going to be closer to the abnormal range than somebody who draws it without any error, okay, which is pretty amazing. Why? Because if you look at this full range of normal, these are all normal clocks, but here the circles are still relatively normal, right? It's just kind of this person has a tremor here, right? But the human would say that's a relatively normal circle for somebody who is elderly and has neurological problems just for shakiness, right? And same for these, right? But what happens is that when you look at cases where people are incorrectly drawing both hands and numbers, then you see more pronounced fashion, right? That the edge is kind of starting to have bumps and corners and stuff like that. Okay? And the eye has a hard time objectively registering this, right? But our technology shows that at population level, we can actually detect it, right, as the physical significance, in a very objective way. So that's why I included this. Okay. Questions? Okay. That's it. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you for, went long. It was very technical, but yes. But you guys are a technical audience, so Questions, comments? Yes. Partnerships, yes. Please.
I am not a technical person at all, so thank you for that. I feel smarter already. But have you thought of, this seems like incredible technology and the applications could be endless, but have you thought of other applications for this technology?
Yes, definitely in the material sciences and even engineering. Have you seen those pictures of wind tunnels where they a model airplane and they're blowing wind through it, right? So people in Formula F1 racing, NASCAR, right? The shapes of the cars are shaped for very specific reasons to be aerodynamic, so that when it's going fast, right, the air pushes the cars to the ground so the tires grip, right? You don't waste energy spinning tires on the ground that's slippery, right? So they spend time optimizing things like spaceships are shaped the way they are for a reason. Right, and so that actually can benefit tremendously from shape analysis. It's just that it's out of my area of expertise, and so you know, all our examples thus far have been biomedical science, because that's just my background. But definitely in optimization of shapes for aerodynamics, yeah, major improvements. And material science, right? So people who study, create new titanium alloys, right? They add in a bit of nitrogen, a bit of oxygen, makes the, you know, the metal stretchier or firmer, right? But if you look at the microscopic structure, metals are just grains of sand stuck together, right? And the shape of those grains of sands will correlate with their macroscopic properties, right? Do they snap or do they stretch? Things like that. So material science, definitely.
Yeah, so I know from speaking from you earlier, you started this company about 4 years ago. Can you talk about kind of how you guys got started and you decided to go from an idea to a business?
Yeah, and so it began with, you know, I guess 2 tragic losses in my life. One was I had a best friend in college. We were college roommates, and I went through, you know, depression in grad school, and then he went through his own depression, and he ended up taking his own life. Right, so I got this phone call one day that, you know, he struggled with bipolar disorder, right, and so you know, at you know, just the guilt, you know, I mean, survivor's guilt. I survived my bout, he didn't, right, and we shared so many. You know, he was an engineering major, I was a biology major. We had many discussions about intersection of engineering and biology, and at his funeral, I just wanted to do something about bipolar disorder, right, and that's sort of my interest in the background of, you know, just neuroscience, right. My background is in cancer biology. I said one day maybe I'll start a nonprofit or something like that. You know, so that was sort of set the seed for the neuroscience application of the company. And then a few years later, my high school biology teacher who inspired me to go into science, I heard he passed away of an aggressive colon cancer that came back, you know, 3 times, 3 surgeries. And I wasn't able to attend his funeral in Los Angeles, so, you know, and so I had a week to do something, right? And so I wanted to, so I started reading about colon polyps, histology of colon polyps, and why it's so hard for a pathologist to say, this is an aggressive one, this one is not, because their shapes are so, you know, convoluted. So I said, well, computationally, we should be able to measure it more precisely than, you know, the human eye can. So, you know, in studying sort of the shape of colon polyps, right, they're a bunch like a fingers, right, the lining of your gut. That's where the, you know, I wanted to create an algorithm to commemorate him. So the LCPC transform, the core algorithm, the informal name is the Nguyen-Nichols transform. I'm Dave Nguyen, he's Dwayne Nichols, right? And so I wanted to create an abstract and a preprint, you know, for his, in time for his memorial service, right? And that's sort of how this algorithm came to be, right? To measure the shape of colon polyps, right? But then later on, somebody told me, you know, brain folds look very similar to colon polyps, and there's a hackathon coming up. So why don't you join this hackathon and see if, you know, your algorithm will work on, you know, brain scans, right? So we said, hey, UCLA has this, you know, archive of, you know, brain scans from people with ADHD and autism. So okay, let's try it. And we did the hackathon, and it turns out, yeah, it worked well, you know? And then, of course, the hackathon, everyone's telling you, start up, right? So that's how it came to be, right? It's just, you know, one thing after another.
So initially you were talking dementia, which I could kind of see, you know, it's like, okay, what are you going to do about it? But what about the other brain things?
Exactly, right? And so this is, the idea originally was a model to predict bipolar disorder for my friend. Of course, we talked to startup advisors, and this says, you know, there's no money in bipolar disorder, right? But dementia is a hot topic, right? So if you just switched your focus to Alzheimer's, you're more likely to get funding. That's how we ended up studying dementia and Alzheimer's, yeah. Not for scientific reasons, but entrepreneurial reasons.
So do you think that having traction in that currently profitable venture is going to allow you to branch out once it's more generally accepted?
Yes, absolutely. So my sort of a dream would be for a company to buy us out and say, you know, Dave, you're not really a CEO, but we'll make you chief innovation, and we'll let you study whatever disease you want. How's that, right? And then I could hire a team to study bipolar disorder. Yeah.
Because it seems like you would actually, like, this is almost too generic. It's like a, you know, it's a tool, right? Mm-hmm. But if you attacked something like that, Shape Genie can actually, you know, maybe it's the polyps or something like that, and something that actually does pay, you know, that maybe that's a route to go. Or you can be your consultant and, you know, charge lots of money to do that too as well. But that maybe, I mean, you could use your technology and go after, I mean, something profitable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we try. I guess with SBR funding, we tried the Alzheimer's one, which we're currently in the process of. We have to, you know, modify and resubmit. But right now, I guess in an effort to generate revenue, right? Yeah, we're doing that, small projects consulting, right? Projects for various labs who are willing to, pay us at this time. But yeah, and of course, our primary goal now that we're in the revenue generating phase of it, we're beyond the idea phase. The VCs we talked to 5 last year, and the same theme at the end. They went all these calculations with us and said, you know what? You guys are great, but just for our own comfort, we want to wait for you to hit $100,000 ARR first, right? So after 5 of those VCs realized, let's just stop talking to VCs and let's just generate revenue, right? So right now, for me, what I know that I can generate revenue and build partnerships B2B with is through the education product, because that was my background. But yeah,
Okay.
But yeah.
All right, any other questions?
So, sorry, thanks, we really appreciate you coming and talking, and thanks for coming out and sharing with us. So Janae is here from Act Talent, and they were gracious enough to sponsor the food tonight, so.
Yay.
If you wanted to say